welcome to the Messiantics Podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby. Hey guys, and thanks for joining us again this week as we dive into yet another conversation with the Messiantics crew. So today we want to we've been on this trip the last few weeks of kind of mixing things up a little bit, and today we want to kind of follow that train of thought and mix things up a little bit, and we wanted to just take some time. We all have a passion and a heart for the Messianic Jewish movement. I've grown up in it. Toby and Jonathan both came into it, but have been in it for quite a while now and very active. Rabbi Eric's been in it for quite some time now, as he was the rabbi I grew up under, and so on. But Messianic Judaism is something that we all have a passion for. We all have a yearning to see to continue to grow and to develop and to become what it's supposed to be. I've grown up in the movement hearing people forever say, Messianic Judaism, we're supposed to be the head and not the tail. And a lot of times we're still too busy hiding our heads in the sand instead of really dealing with actual issues and taking the responsibility of being the head and not the tail of the body of Messiah. And so as we work our way through this discussion today, we're going to throw out the topic, what each of us thinks the Messianic movement needs as an improvement or an effort towards bettering itself to make it what it's supposed to be for the longevity of what the Messianic Jewish movement is here for. And so with that said, I'm going to just open up the floor. Whoever wants to toss out the first concept, we're going to each kind of throw something out and talk about it around the table.
Yeah, I liked what you said. This is Rabbi Eric, by the way. I liked what you said when you talked about putting head in the sand. I was listening to a different podcast the other day, and in it they talked about how young people were walking away from faith because faith had lost its relevance in their life. And when we're talking about the Messianic Jewish movement, a lot of what we're dealing with are things that are really settled issues that we're still bringing up again, the battles from years ago that don't really exist anymore, but we had so much fun fighting them, we just bring them back up all the time rather than moving forward and doing something. And so because of that, we're not as relevant as we could be. And part of that lack of relevance is that we live as people that are beginning things. In other words, when you start a ministry, for instance, when I started Messianic Synagogue, in Messianic Judaism, there was only our congregation in Mobile, and then there wasn't another congregation for 3 hours or more in any direction. So we were really pioneers in what was going on. But the pioneering of the Messianic movement, although we're still starting new congregations, we're not fighting those same pioneer battles anymore. And so where I had to, in the congregation that we started, and then the other congregation we started out of it, where we had to invent everything and redo everything and be on our own to do everything, that's not really the case anymore, and yet we still operate that way. And so if there was one thing that I could change in the Messianic movement that I think would help us to become what we could be, it was to start doing things together. In other words, for instance, in Israel, they have lots of different humanitarian ministries, but they're all individuals. So they're all seeking funding from the same people to fund different things instead of having one administration and then people that do things. When we bring out new music, instead of everybody having to make PowerPoint slides for every new song, one person could do it and share it out. When we find a good
Nobody
book,
uses PowerPoint anymore.
Whatever, the presentation software. The presentation software, and disseminate it, to share music together, to work together. When somebody writes a new prayer or utilizes liturgy in a new way, to share it with others. And one of Rabbi Jonathan's passions that he's going to talk about is education. It's traditional or historical, rather, that when a movement or a new denomination, and I don't want to use denomination to describe Messianic Judaism because we're not really denominational, although I think we could be and maybe should be in some ways. started within 50 years, they had their own university, their own college, their own seminary that they have. And although we have seminary structures within other colleges, we've not been able to unify to bring about having our own college. So if I could change one thing, it would just be that we would start working together, that the union, which is the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations and the International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues and the other different groups that are out there would start being brotherly and working together instead of adversarial, as if we were all trying to build our own kingdom, and work together to accomplish things.
So this is Rabbi David. I'm going to jump in because my suggestion goes right along with what yours does, and I'm actually going to say that the word we're both kind of playing off of is the idea of unity. But even more so, I'm going to look at it from the converse side of that is, you're suggesting that the various organizations of the Messianic movement, right? And that includes the congregational organizations, UMJC, IMCS, and others that exist that you mentioned. That includes the quote-unquote missional organizations of Jews for Jesus and Chosen Peoples and Jewish Voice and so on, and all of the different Messianic
outreach organizations like Ahavad Ami and Yeshivat Shuvu and others that are out there.
And everything that's in Israel and Eastern Europe and whatever, it's not just an idea of working together, but I know this is a really novel idea, and I know that we as Jewish people have a much better history of arguing than we do of supporting each other, but the converse side to working together is, how about we not work against each other? Right? We need to be in unity. John 17, Yeshua says, and we talked about this a few episodes back also, John 17, verse 20, Yeshua says, I pray not on behalf of these only, talking about the disciples that are there with him, but also for those who believe in me through their message, which is the very gospel we're reading, right? Who believe in their message, that they all be one. Just as you, Father, are in me and I am in you, so also may they be one in us, so the world may believe that you sent me. The glory that you have given to me, I have given to them, that they may be one, just as we are one, I in them and you in me, and that they may be perfected in unity, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them as you loved me. And I think, unfortunately, we love to talk about unity as a theoretical thing. But actually living it out in the practical, we really don't want to do that, because that's where things get messy. That's where things get complicated. That's where people's toes get stepped on, and we've got to actually try to work for relationship healing and building, and we got to apologize to people and all that kind of stuff that nobody really wants to deal with. But the reality is if Yeshua says it is through our unity that the world around us will know who sent us, will know who sent him. Who is it that they're seeing in us if we're divided and broken and not in unity? Because it's not God, right? God is not a God of unity, of destruction or disunity or division. He's a God of unity. He's a God of bringing the many together as echad, to bring the many together as one. And when we're talking about this idea of unity within the Messianic Jewish movement, I think that's the big key of it. Not only do we need to work together, but even when we're not physically in the same environment working together, we need to make sure we're also not working against each other too, right? I grew up in the Messianic Jewish movement pretty much my entire life, and the number one thing that still to this day bugs the ever-living fire out of me, and I'm guilty of it sometimes too, because unfortunately I was raised with this mentality and I try to fight against it most of the time, but the thing that just absolutely drives me nuts, and this is for my Jews for Jesus people out there, I love you guys, this is the thing that always drives me nuts, is when somebody asks me, oh, are you Jewish? Well, yeah, I am. Oh, I saw the yarmulke, I wasn't sure. Well, it's not a fashion statement, I promise. It doesn't look all that great, but are you Jewish? Yeah, I'm Jewish. Okay. Are you Orthodox? Well, no, I'm actually a Messianic Jew. That means I'm a Jew that believes in Yeshua, or Jesus is the promised Messiah of Israel. Oh, so you're like one of those Jews for Jesus guys, right? And so often, what we've always done in the Messianic movement on the congregational side is no, we're not like Jews for Jesus. We're not like Jews, because Jews for Jesus, they're missional, and we're congregational, we're local, we're rabbis and da-da-da, and it's always this idea of us versus them. And I don't think that the Messianic Jewish movement can be what it's intended to be, what it's supposed to be, who we are called to be, until we can stop trying to tell the rest of the world that we're not the other guy, that we're not the other people. So yeah, until we get to a place that we stop feeling the necessity to correct someone when they ask us if we're Jews for Jesus or if we're this or we're that, it's one thing to correct someone if there's actually something that's wrong about the statement, right? Jews for Jesus is a part of Messianic Judaism. CPM, Chosen People Ministries, is a part of Messianic Judaism. Right. Just as the UMJC, the IMCS, Ahavat Dami, and others are all a part of Messianic Judaism. And we're doing more damage, I think, personally, I think we're doing more damage working against each other, or at least just as much damage working against each other as we are if we actually, as Rabbi Eric suggested, working with each other, working for each other. And I think it's just time that we start to make it a priority to actually be in unity. Like, would it be awesome if, I would absolutely love to see the UMJC and the IMCS become one organization. I don't think that there's enough of us in the Messianic Jewish world and in the Messianic Jewish congregational
to be
experience.
That divided.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough of us to have two organizations that are in essence doing the same thing, just from different sides of the coin. And I definitely don't think there's enough of us that it's constantly an us versus them attitude. Like, I'm a part of both organizations and I love both organizations, but I definitely can sense that there's an us versus them attitude on both sides of the field.
Yeah. Right.
And as long as that continues on, we're never going to get anywhere. We're never going to progress where we should be, and we're certainly never going to be, as we said at the tip of the episode, we're certainly never going to be the head and not the tail, because we can't even figure out how to be the head of ourselves, much less try and jump in as the head of the body of Messiah. So what do you guys think on that?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree. There's a lot of and you can detect it in conversations, even Facebook posts sometimes. Like I ran across a joke one time, and it was meant as a joke in a Facebook page, Messianic group, and it was about how one of the umbrella groups was more halachically observant than the other groups, and it was really it was very obvious. You could tell which one they were talking about versus the other one. And I was just and I've seen that a lot. And, before, I've only been with Brit-Om for a couple years now. So, I've only been under the IMCS umbrella for a couple years. Before that, I was, kind of off in one of the many different, individual...
the independent swing.
Independent swing of things. And, it becomes more apparent the more involved I get with... specifically with the IMCS, that there are other their interactions with other groups is sometimes could be more cordial, for sure.
That's one way to put it.
But there seems to be this pushback with one another on how they do things, how they govern, how they're set up, down to the way they even do. Education, which I'm going to talk about here in a bit. Toby, did you have anything about what David said?
I agree with everything. I don't know how that could ever be reversed, just because everything's pretty entrenched. I agree that the Messianic movement isn't large enough to have all these organizations and stuff. At the same time, they've really rooted themselves, and I'm with David. I love both, and I love people in both. I love both. I mean, there's wonderful people in both organizations. Yeah. I just don't know how it could be reversed, because I think everybody's pretty comfortable where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing though. I don't have an answer for how we bridge the gap. I don't have an answer for how we actually come together in unity, but I can say that not having answers isn't a good enough excuse
I agree.
To not strive to find them.
I want to say that my wife, Brooke, was involved in a youth kind of bridge, a gesher between both organizations. It was called Grassroots. Mm-hmm. And it was wildly successful.
Yeah.
God blessed it. And people loved it, especially younger people.
Yeah. Well, and the grassroots movement, which unfortunately I was invited to a couple of them, but I wasn't able to actually get there for various reasons. But the grassroots thing, the whole reason it started was because you had a bunch of kids that grew up in the IMCS, a bunch of kids that grew up in the UMJC, a bunch of kids that grew up in the Jews for Jesus world, Chosen People world, etc. That they kind of met each other and went, oh, we kind of live the same experience.
Right.
We kind of do the same stuff. We kind of believe the same thing. Why do we not know each other? And as they talk, they realize, oh, we don't know each other, not because we shouldn't know each other, not because we don't do the same thing, not because we aren't part of the same people, but we don't know each other because our parents had beef with each other 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah. And they sowed that beef that they had into our generation. Right. And so Grassroots basically said, you know what? Look, our parents' beef is their beef. We don't care. That's their thing. We're going to come together and figure out how to do this thing together. Like, even if we're all in different organizations, we're still going to figure out how to do this thing together and love each other.
Which I think that's likely, an answer as far as getting to a better place is it would take something grassroots. I don't mean it. I'm not talking. It would take something like that, but grassroots, is also an adjective. Something it would take, and with it being so successful, and the reason why it's so successful, in my opinion, is simply because that is the heart of God.
Yeah.
And I think that when He sees us doing something in unity, it's His very nature to be attracted to it. I'm not talking about God being manipulated. It's just it pulls the virtue out of Him. He's just like, I love it. I got to be there.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I'm just saying that I think something like Grassroots is the closest thing we'll have to a solution.
Yeah.
Well, and it requires people talking. That's part of the problem. Is you
talk respecting
about
the opinions that are different.
Hey, have you talked to so and so lately, or did you listen to the message of so and so lately? Oh no, they're part of the union. I can't listen to that. So are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like, that's not at all the approach we should have to interacting.
I think in a lot of ways, what Grassroots was for the younger generations of Messianic Jewish. The Messianic Jewish movement. I think in a lot of ways, Jewish Voice Ministries Messianic Leadership Roundtable Conference was for the movement as a whole.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately they've now laid it to rest. It ran for a significant period of time, and unlike many sitcoms, JVMI chose to let Messianic Leadership Roundtable go out on a high as opposed to waiting while people still loved it and wanted to be there instead of waiting for people to decide it was trash and wanted to walk away.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the Messianic Leadership Roundtable, I think in a lot of ways that conference was the adaptation of the concept of Grassroots. Like, hey, all of the stuff that divides us really doesn't matter. Let's come together on what matters, which are the things we all agree on. Let's come together and build unity and relationship. And it did wonders, I think, wonders for the movement. Absolutely.
And it was the same with, I have to plug a ministry that I was involved in the conception of, was Me'ochad, which was that, my wife and I were involved in its conception along with Mark and Dara Vidito, Ian and Kara Arroyo, and other Jamie Eaton at Charest, Matt Adams down in Florida, and we were just local worship leaders and people involved, and we wanted to see something cross-organizational, cross-generational, to do that in the area of Messianic worship music. And we did. I was involved in the ministry for 5 years, and that was our heart. And the response was great, because I think that is what people want. Because I think you have a lot of people in this generation now. We're not, the generation of the Grassroots when we were kids. We're now the parents.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
And we don't even share those same. Feelings or divisiveness.
I describe it this way, and I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers by any means, but I describe it this way
what
personally.
Are you talking about? Of course,
right?
I can't believe that.
I describe it this way, like the early generations of the modern Messianic Jewish movement, which includes my father. The early generations of the modern Messianic movement, they've spent most of the last 40 or 50 years fighting an identity crisis. Right. So, and by that, what I mean is that my dad's generation and before him in the Messianic movement, they were working very diligently not only to establish and to pioneer Messianic Judaism and Messianic Jewish congregations, but they were also working and putting a significant chunk of their time, energy, and resources into both trying to prove to the Jewish world that they're still Jewish, even though they believe in Jesus, and trying to prove to the Christian world that they still believe in Jesus, even though they think being Jewish means something. Right. And so they've been stuck in this identity crisis for a very, very long time. Whereas our generation, which for those that are don't know us personally, that listen to the Messianics podcast on a regular basis, Rabbi Eric is the old guy of the group. And then Toby is right behind him. But no, Rabbi Eric, my father, is 60 years old. Rabbi Toby, you're 42, right? Yeah, I'm 40. And then Jonathan, you're like 26, right?
Yeah.
No. Was it a good guess? I was just joking.
Yeah, no, I am, yeah.
So then Toby's the next old guy, but so the three of us, quote unquote, younger rabbis are we're in a bit of a different place in terms of generationally the Messianic Jewish movement, and in my experience within my generation of the Messianic Jewish movement is that my generation doesn't care as much about the identity crisis because we're not really struggling with that anymore. We've kind of gotten to a place that we're very literally the ideal of what Messianic Judaism. The hopes of Messianic Judaism were that our parents had, right? Because I don't care if somebody doesn't think I'm Jewish. That doesn't change my world at all. Like, I know who I am, and I'm comfortable in that. And you're disagreeing with my being Jewish because I believe in Yeshua doesn't change that. It's not going to make me change my mind at all. It's not going to adjust anything. I am comfortable in who I am. And if the church doesn't believe that I'm really a believer, you know what? That stinks. But that's also not my problem. I care more about what God thinks about me and what I'm here to do as a congregational leader within Messianic Judaism and so on. And so I think a big part of why Grassroots worked and worked well was because it was a generation of people that they're not dealing with the same identity crisis.
Yeah, they were removed from it.
Yeah, and so we were able to come together because you got to remember that identity crisis, when you battle with an identity crisis, it filtrates through your entire life. Every aspect of it, right?
It affects every decision you make.
Yeah, so there's no surprise, in my opinion, and I'm just going to talk about the UMJC and the IMCS as examples. It's no surprise, in my opinion, that we have the kind of butting of heads, as Rabbi Jonathan was talking about earlier, between the UMJC and the IMCS, the leaders of the two, the rabbis of the two, and so on. Because the reality is there's still that identity crisis. The IMCS is this, and they do that, and they're different this way, and the UMJC is this and they're that and they do things this way and it's different, and it's still that same identity crisis. Well, they're trying to prove they're really Jewish and they're trying to prove they're really Jewish, but they're trying to prove it from different ways. And the reality is that identity crisis is still a battle. And I think the beauty of the generation that we're a part of, in terms of the leadership of the movement, is that we're not battling that identity crisis. And because of that, because of the fact that we really don't care what the outside community thinks of us, right?
And we care less. I think there's a less of a concern about if someone's Jewish or non-Jewish.
Yeah. I mean, yes, because the reality, like we talked a few weeks ago in the conversations on the One New Man, is that we realize there's a necessity for both Jew and non-Jew alike in the body of Messiah. Rabbi Toby and I, on the way to Pensacola this morning, we were talking about the idea of those of the nations driving the Judah jealousy for his God. And Rabbi Toby was commenting on how, in his experience, he's noticed that it appears that a Jewish believer in Messiah trying to share Messiah with a Jewish person, because of the roadblock of you can't be Jewish and believe in Jesus, there's naturally an already present barrier in that conversation that's really hard to get over. But he noticed that Gentiles in the Messianic movement, that a Jewish person will go, "Are you Jewish?" Well, no, I'm not. I'm a Gentile. I'm of the nations. He goes,
a fascination is provoked.
Yeah. He goes, "Well, why do you do this? And why are you going to synagogue? And why are you
to be Shomer Shabbat? And, to keep.
Why are you going to synagogue? And why in the world are you fasting on Yom Kippur? We have to, and we don't want to. Why are you doing it?"
And they start looking at themselves.
And then they start asking questions, and then those questions lead to other questions, and it opens up that barrier breaks down. I think Paul was getting at something when he said the nations have been brought in to be to drive the Jew to jealousy for his God, and in the same sense, the Jew was called out to begin with. The nation of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we're called out to be a light to the nations, and we have to work together in order to see that occur. So we've talked quite a bit on the unity, and I actually think both of your suggestions that you want to throw out filter right into that conversation as well. So before we go too much farther, I just want to give you guys opportunities to throw out your suggestions, and I'm sure in one way or another it'll all tie back into this also.
My suggestion is it's short, but I think it's it's brief, but it's not going to take me long to explain it. Simply, I see a rather large divide between the older generations and the younger generations. And I'll give you an example. I went to the Messiah conference in 2012. Now, look, this was 10 years ago, but it still rings true, I think.
I went this past summer, and it's still
okay.
It's still
so.
pretty.
I'll give you an example. You have the MJAA, and then you have the YMJA, and I think they're two. I mean, the YMJA is an extension of the MJA, and look, I've been blessed by the MJAA. I love the MJAA. When I was at the Messiah conference, I was leading worship for the YMJA, and I was in Larson every day, except one, where we were in the main service for what is called YMJA night. And do I think it's a problem for youth to people of between the ages
for those that aren't familiar with Messiah College and the Messian Jewish Alliance of America's Messiah conference that's held there? Conveniently, the names work, so it's interesting. But for those that aren't familiar, Larson is a building on campus. It's like the commons of the college there, and it's a building on campus that the YMJ, the Young Messianic Jewish Alliance, does their entire sub-conference at Messiah Conference. So all of their events all week long are held in Larson, and then everything for the rest of the conference is held across like 4 other buildings. And so what Rabbi Toby was getting at is that if you're there with the YMJ stuff, you're completely segregated in Larson, except for one single event, which is the main night on Thursday nights at the YMJ leads.
Yeah, and it's still largely that way.
Yeah.
Even this past summer when Rabbi Eric and I were there, it was even during meal times, there really wasn't a large presence of. And I'm the oldest of 5, so I'm very younger children conscious.
Right.
And there were almost no children or youth, even at the meal times, present.
Yeah, and the point I'm getting at is when we do that, and I think that's too stark of a contrast. I think that's too big of a divide. And then you allow one night. And this is why I believe, and this is the point I'm getting to, is that over the years, my wife and I have had friends that are our age in the movement. I'm talking now we're in our mid to late 30s, early 40s. We were in our mid to late 20s, It has led to, there are some friends that we had, very dear friends that we, grew up with in the movement that aren't in the movement anymore. Yeah. Because some of them got disillusioned with feeling like, look, I'm called to this thing, and I had fun at Larson, and I had fun in Polk City. I'm talking about the Southeast Youth Retreat. I had fun at these retreats, but now I'm ready to embrace a bigger role. Yeah. I'm growing up, and it gets denied in some cases, not in every case.
Yeah.
And I feel like there are a lot of people still in my generation that have torches that aren't being lit by the older generations. And I think a big problem is, I just think one example is if you look at what happens. I have people my age that still talk about the days at Larson. I'm like, why are we still talking about Larson?
Yeah.
And I can tell you it, and it's not just a matter of the divide, the age divide, like at conferences and stuff, right? I think it goes farther than that. I think it goes deeper than that.
Yeah, that was just an example.
Yeah. The Messianic Jewish movement, I think we have a vision for the future, but I don't think we have a vision for how to get to the vision for the future, right? Because one of the issues, as I've said, I grew up in this. This is pretty much all I've ever known is the Messianic Jewish movement. And I've known since as far back as I can remember exactly what my calling was, that I was supposed to be a Messianic Jewish rabbi. Now I didn't want it, and I ran from it for a while. But I've known that was my calling. But at the same time, when I turned, I was 20, 21, something like that, when I first tried to enter into the ordination process with the IMCS, they just kind of put my stuff off to the side. There was no effort put into building. Here you are, I've listened to the rabbis of the Messianic Jewish movement for 2 decades at that point talk about constantly, we want to see younger rabbis, we want to raise up new leaders, we want to raise up a future. Here you have one standing in front of you saying, I want to pick up that mantle.
You have a Joshua sitting outside the tent.
I want you to train me, raise me up, build me up to go do it. And they're, I don't really know what to do with you. I don't really, we're going to hold off. Why don't you wait? You're not old enough. Why don't you wait a little longer? Why don't you go? And part of the reason why, and the segue is interesting, part of the reason why that's a problem is because of the very issue that Rabbi Jonathan's going to bring up in a second. Yeah. But the reality is we've not, again, I think it goes back to the identity crisis. We spent so much time, energy, and resources in trying to fight the identity crisis that we're really Jewish and we believe in Jesus, and everybody needs to understand how those two things work together, that we've missed out on all of the other pieces of the puzzle that are so vital, not only to the success of Messianic Judaism, but to a valid future for Messianic Judaism. And so, Rabbi Jonathan, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Before we go to Rabbi Jonathan, I just want to say a big advocate for this, and it's just we need more voices like this, is Rabbi Jonathan Bernis.
Yes, absolutely. With Jewish Voice Ministries.
With Jewish Voice Ministries, who said something that I will never forget when my wife and I had the honor of sitting under him at the leadership track of the Arch Summit. He said, one of the first things I do when I enter a leadership role is I begin to work myself out of my job, whether that's short-term or long-term. He goes, I have to prepare for the future.
Yep.
And that's not happening enough. And keeping the young people sequestered, except one night we let them run and do their thing, is that what you're going to have is either they're going to walk away or they're going to be pushing 50 and still wanting to be the YMJ.
Now I do want to. I do want to throw a couple of caveats to that conversation out real quick, though, and that is that it's important to remember the context of it all, because it's not like in terms of like the YMJ week. And this isn't. Listen, guys, if I love the YMJ, I grew up in the YMJ. This isn't beating up on the YMJ at all or anything like that. But
no.
We need to understand that this is a problem from both sides of the spectrum.
Yes.
The YMJ wants to do things on their own. They want to be separate. And I get it. It's important. It's valid to sow into the younger generation in an authentic way that feeds into what they need at that time. I get that. What we're not saying, hey, you should write off the YMJ track at the Messiah Conference and just make them do everything the old people are doing. But what we are saying is that there needs to be some real effort at integration. And just giving the YMJ one night to lead a service isn't integration.
Right.
That's showcasing, and that's a whole different thing. And I
agree. That's it.
Showcasing may have an okay place at some points, but that's not the same as integration. Yeah. And as a prime example,
showcasing is for children's choirs.
Correct.
Correct. High holy days.
I want go ahead.
As a prime example, the Southeast Regional Conference, by the way, and I'm going to plug it a little earlier than we intended to, the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America's Southeast Regional Conference is going to be the weekend of December the 18th.
16th through the 18th.
Thank you. 16th through the 18th, December 16th through 18th in Orlando, Florida at the Rosen Plaza Hotel. I can't recommend this conference enough. It's a 3-day, 2.5 day. It's a weekend conference. But it's an awesome opportunity, especially if you go to a Messianic congregation in a small community or something along those lines. It's a phenomenal way to get together with Messianic believers from all walks of life all over the Southeast region of the U.S.
It's awesome.
And to realize you're not the only one, right? We always feel weird and out there, but you're not the only one. There's more of us out there.
Yes.
And it's a great way to build relationships and so on.
And to pursue the actual unity we're talking
exactly.
about. Here.
And so that conference is going to be at the Rosen Plaza on International Drive in Orlando the weekend of December 16th through 18th. You can go to mjaa.org to find more information out about the conference. Click on the conference tab at the top and find the Southeast Regional, and you can register online. The hotel's got a special rate. I forget what it is, but
it's like $95 a night, I think.
Yeah, something like that. But definitely go check it out. But I bring up the Southeast Regional for this reason. I grew up going to the Southeast Regional. Most of the last 16, 18 years, whatever it is, I've been going to the Southeast Regional faithfully every single year. And I always, especially once I got involved in the rabbinic side of things and became a Messianic rabbi myself, the YMJ, at that point, they would have their own Torah service on Saturday morning. So you'd have the big Torah service for the whole conference, and then the YMJ had their own Torah service separate in the YMJ room on the second floor. They would have their own Torah service separate. And growing up in the YMJ, that always bugged me, because I always looked at that and went, what better place for integration than the Torah service? Let's get multi-generations together. And so for the first early years that I was a rabbi, I was asked on a regular basis to come and lead the Torah service for the YMJ. And so I would go and do it because I really have a heart for sowing into younger generations and raising up new leaders and so on. So I would go and participate and lead the Torah service or speak in the Torah service or whatever. But it got to a point after a few years, I was like, man, this just isn't the way it should be. Like, we could do this a lot better if we integrated the two. So for a few years, I would ask the leadership, the rabbis, hey, what do you guys think about integrating the YMJ and the main Torah service, like making them one thing and using the young people in the service and giving them parts and roles to play and fully integrating the two into one service so that families as a whole can do Torah service together on Shabbat morning. And they were like, oh, we would love to do that, but the YMJ would just never go for it. They would never go for it. So I'd go to the YMJ. Hey, what do you guys think? Oh, we would love to do it, but the MJ, the rabbis, they would never go for it. The rabbis would never go for it. So after a couple of years of this back and forth, and I'm not going to lie, I was very much a little shady on how I handled this. But after a couple of years of dealing with this same thing, I finally was like, you know what? They're both saying it's the other guy, that they want to do it, but it's the other guy, so I'm going to put them both on the spot.
Go ask your father. Go ask your mother.
So I sent an email to some of the rabbis in leadership and said, what do you guys think about this? And explained it, but I sent the exact same email to the YMJ guys. Was, what do you guys think about doing this? And they both responded, we would love to do it. Now I've got it on print, right? We would love to do it, but they don't want to. And I was like, oh, well, funny you should say that, because here's evidence that both sides say they want to do it, so can we make this happen? And they both kind of were like, oh, I guess we got to do this now. But it ended up being, in all honesty, it ended up being one of the most powerful Torah services I have ever experienced in my life. Yeah. And it's now become a fully integrated Torah service that's become like the highlight, the key component, if you would, of the Southeast Regional Conference every single year.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it seem like I think nothing's being done. Yeah. I just, and I want to reiterate, because, just what David said made me think of it. I also want to reiterate how tremendous and how life-changing the YMJ has been for me, as well as the MJA and the UMJC. Yeah. I mean, tremendous blessing to me. So I don't want to. I'm not ragging the YMJ. I think it's wonderful.
Though for you and I, it's been a number of years that we've been booted from the YMJ.
I think when you keep them two separate, when it comes time to build a bridge, like David showed in his own true story, it almost came. Well, we don't know. Do we need to even build the bridge?
Yeah. Oh, and because, the YMJ runs till what, 21? It's really...
technically 30.
Technically 30, yeah.
Okay.
And I just know you have a lot of young people that are like...
Now, when you get into that, when you get above high school, when you graduate high school, there's like a college, a career side and a high school side.
Okay.
But the age of the YMJ goes up to, I think, 30.
But I think that the story about the YMJ just represents a bigger issue, even outside the YMJ, which is just young people need a clear path to embrace their calling when they get older, when it's their generation for God to use them.
And they need mentors that are willing to help them identify that calling. And listen, it's not just a ministerial calling. Like, I'm not talking just what do you call it? Professional ministry, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Professional clergy.
Yeah. I'm not just talking
full-time
about
ministry.
Being a rabbi or a worship leader or a youth
lay
leader.
Ministry.
Like, we're not just talking about congregational or missional ministry as a calling. Like, we've got to understand, and I think this feeds into everything we're talking about, right? We've got to understand that 99.8% of the Messianic Jewish movement have zero ministry calling within a congregation or an organization. Their calling is to be in ministry in the marketplace.
Right.
And we need to recognize it's not just about sowing into young people to become rabbis or worship leaders or whatever else, but it's sowing into young people to live their calling out as a follower of the promised Messiah of Israel, living out the Great Commission in their marketplace. Marketplace ministry is such a vital thing that we just complete. I think as a whole, the body of Messiah just doesn't do enough to build up marketplace. We talk about calling, and it's always rabbi, pastor, it's always worship leader, missionary, whatever.
That's true. You're right.
But some people, like, I got a really good friend. I'm not going to throw his name out there, but I got a really good friend, lives in California, and I think at some point he's got a calling to be a rabbi. But nonetheless, there is definitively a dynamic calling on his life in the business world. And he has reached so many people with the good news of Yeshua through his marketplace ministry, through living his life out for the Lord no matter what in the marketplace. He's reached more people than I lead a congregation. I've been involved in congregations all over the U.S. He's reached more people, I think, that I've had an opportunity to just in any given annual year, because of the fact that he's able to interact in a grander scale with people. And we need to recognize that it's not just building up people to live out a calling in ministry, in vocational ministry. That's the word I'm looking for. To live out a vocational ministry call. But there are those whose call ministry call is in the marketplace. We need to build them up as well.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that mechanics have a phenomenal opportunity to share the good news, because you know what? An elderly widow comes in with their brakes needing to be done. That mechanic has the opportunity to be able to share the love of Messiah, very literally taking care of the widowed right there in a very honest way, and care for them and make sure that only what needs to be done is done, and give them whatever breaks they can, and so on.
Yeah.
That's just one example, but that marketplace ministry is something that we just ignore, and I don't think we do it intentionally. It's just our thought is calling ministry, vocational ministry. And
Absolutely.
Jonathan, I'll let you. I want to tag in on your.
Oh no, that's fine. That's totally.
Too.
I mean, it's a very important thing, and it's candles shine brighter when there's usually one or two, not 60 of them. So when you're in congregational ministry, especially, you are usually surrounded by others who are sharing light, and you're still light. Like, it doesn't change the fact that you're light, but you're like, what are you? Now you may be pouring oil into others. You may be pouring, adding wax to the candles of other people, which is what we do. It's just a large part of our ministry is to pour into people so that they can burn bright outside in the world when they're standing by themselves. And so
that's a good way to look at it.
And it's important for those people to realize that when you're by yourself, you shine all the brighter when you live a godly life, when you share about Yeshua and your relationship to being a disciple of Yeshua. So that's very important. And and it does stand out. I'll never forget the time that the owner of the restaurant I worked in years ago, she was at least nominally Catholic. I don't know how observant she was as a Catholic, but she told me one time, and I had been there for almost a year, and she was talking to me one time because something had come up, and I was just expressing probably how I would not do a certain thing to handle the said issue and I couldn't remember if it was a kitchen issue or a front of house issue, but she just kind of looked at me and she's like, I just want to let you know that whenever I think of Jesus and how he would have been in the world, how he behaved in the world, you are the closest to that. You come the closest to me seeing him in you, out of most people that I see as Christians. I'm like, well, thank you. That's a huge compliment, because that's what I strive for every day, is
right.
that his light would shine through me, and that my Father in heaven would be glorified by my life. But so marketplace ministry is definitely one we could focus more on. And but anyway, I'm going to jump into what we could improve on in the Messianic movement as a whole is actually establishing a good, emphasis on good, form of organized education. Because here's the reality of it. When like Rabbi Eric was saying earlier, there is not a religious system within the Judeo-Christian system. Judaism has yeshivot all over the world, whether they be conservative or Orthodox or Reform. And they have systems that have been established for decades, if not centuries, for that education. The only reason we have higher education in the United States is because of Christianity. Regardless of what people want to say, yes, Christendom is the reason we have higher education in the United States. The reason we have colleges and universities. The first colleges in the United States, Harvard and Yale, they were both established as places of training for the clergy, and they included things like the sciences and higher maths and things. Those things are not supposed to be excluded from the life and the training of people who believe and serve the God of creation. It actually reveals how serious you are about something when you don't establish a formal training plan, something that is good, something that's credible. I know people, and look, this is not to say that education is the end-all be-all. I definitely don't believe that. But it is important, and it reveals, it's sort of like, salvation is not by works, but works certainly reveal a whole lot about what you actually believe. Education is the same way. How you organize education, how you organize, the training for the next generation of leaders actually reveals something about how serious you take your movement, whatever it may be. And in the Messianic movement, if I were to be an outsider looking in, I would not see a whole lot of serious dedication to the training of the next generation. Frankly, because even non-denominational Christian groups have Bible colleges that they send, that they hire from their pastors and their
So Rabbi Eric is, you noticed you haven't heard his voice in quite a while on this episode. Unfortunately, Rabbi Eric, shortly into recording this episode, had to leave for an emergency with his wife. She's fine, everything's okay, but he had to leave to go help and take care of her. But one of the things he was talking about before we started recording, that because we were kind of tossing around some of these suggestions, pretty much so we didn't double down on each other. But some of these suggestions before we actually started recording, and one of the things he talked about with regards to what Rabbi Jonathan is saying is that if you look at the history of the denominations of the church, historically speaking, statistics say that somewhere around within 50 years of the start of that denomination, there's a college and or seminary established for the purpose of training up new leaders in that denomination. And Messianic Judaism, as we know it today, has been around for 40, pushing 50 years now.
Yeah.
And we're nowhere near that. Like, there are things like there are a few schools. I'm working on an MDiv right now in Messianic Jewish Studies with the King's University out of Southlake, Texas, which has a phenomenal Messianic Jewish Studies program, an undergrad, a couple of master's degrees, and then a DMin, a doctorate of ministry in Messianic Jewish Studies. Chosen People Ministries, working with Biola, has the Feinberg Center, which has an MDiv program in Messianic Jewish Studies. And there's a few others. St. Petersburg Seminary. With
MJTI.
St. Petersburg Seminary has the Netzer David, which is a Messianic Jewish Studies program.
Avadami has Yeshiva Tshuvu.
There are a few scattered around, for the most part, with exception of MJTI and Yeshivat Shuvu, with exception of those two. Most of our stuff, most of our formal education that's available is just tacked onto other people's stuff, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because honestly, I hate reinventing the wheel. And that's not a bad thing, especially if it's a really good program like TKU and Feinberg are, where, yes, it's attached onto another school's program, but it's a very in-depth, formal Messianic Jewish Studies training. So those things do exist, but we don't have anything formal for the movement. MJTI does its own thing. Yeshivat Shuvu does its own thing, but neither of them are really, in a lot of ways, MJTI is very representational of the UMJC, but it's not a UMJC thing. It is an accepted program for ordination with the UMJC, as TKU, Feinberg, and TKU and St. Petersburg are.
Yeah, and it's not to say that people aren't trying necessarily, but when we talk about unity, and we talk about we see the different groups pushing back against each other's stuff, like, well, we're not doing that because they're doing that, or they do that, so we're not doing that, and you just kind of, it cuts out the legs from under people. It shoots people down, because like, for example, people are trying, but they're not quite getting there, because it's also not it's not treated as serious. It's not treated formally like you would. Like, for example, Toby, when you went off to college, your parents, your family, they were all super excited for you. They probably gave you a bunch of money, threw a party and sent you off, and helped you move into an apartment or your dorm, and settled you down, and like, life was serious. You were going to be living in a different place. You were going to be sitting at the feet of professors, learning whatever, whether biology or math or music. You were going to be meeting new people, and your life was seriously focused and set on that. I know that the union has K20, which attempts to do sort of almost like a distance learning with mentorship. That's close and local. But it's not something that because even this year, like, they were talking about, I was listening to, I think, reading actually one of the dialogues, and you can tell me more because y'all were both there at the conference, I think, in Raleigh, but they had talked about that they didn't quite meet the quota they wanted to with K20, I think, over the last year. They got up there, but they didn't get quite where they wanted to. Partially it's because that, there's so many people that, called into ministry that want to take seriously the training, but we don't often provide the ability for people to enter into that training seriously.
Well, if they tack on to these, like Biola, it would be an example. I know that's not a cheap school.
Yeah.
But oddly with that one, the Feinberg Center, which is CPM's project with their education project with Biola is not a cheap school, but Chosen People Ministries, or at least in its inception, I believe it's still the same, but I haven't looked at it in a few years. But
right.
CPM, Chosen People Ministries, has set up a way that they help subsidize the tuition for their students, and at least a few years back, it may have changed a little bit now, but a few years back, I think it was like $1,000 per, or $100 per credit or something. Whatever it was, it
wasn't much.
It was ridiculously cheap considering what Biola's tuition normally
and there's
is.
not a seminary on the planet that doesn't have some kind of program that you go, okay, oh, you're Lutheran? Okay, if your church will pledge this much, we have this many churches who are also willing to pledge to your education so you can enter into the ministry. And, it's one of the reasons why, I'm blessed to be here at Bradam, because when I got brought on here at Bradam, Rabbi Eric and the elders agreed that, well, not only am I paid as staff here full-time, but I'm also, they're willing to help with future educational pursuits, and I plan on pursuing my MDiv eventually in the next couple of years. Just trying to pay down some debt right now,
Right.
but that's taking it seriously. Mm-hmm. When it's sort of like put your money where your mouth is. When you're willing to put money and say, all right, God is calling you to be a rabbi. Let's put you in an intern. Let's put you as an intern somewhere. Let's see how you do. Let's let this rabbi report on you. Okay, successful summer of interning with this rabbi. He's definitely a called teacher. He loves serving people, pouring the words of God into people's lives, and how to live those out today. Great. Now let's offer him some scholarships to go, and let's help him to either relocate. And for those single people, it's really easy to relocate and to put them in school.
Yeah.
And for the people who maybe have families and can't move as easily, let's figure out how to get them into a distance learning program and help them offset the costs to actually pursue that education, because it's...
And truthfully, the organizations, the congregational organizations, because our experience, and I'm going to clarify this, we've talked about the congregational side of Messianic Judaism, missional side of Messianic Judaism, etc. Our experience, this group here, our experience is primarily in the congregational side. And so, generally speaking, I talk from that realm. Not that I think the two are in any way separate from each other. It's all the same movement. It's all the same thing. We just do things in different ways for different end goals. And so, in the congregational side of things, the organizations, like for instance, I think the UMJC does a really good job at prioritizing education for ordination. I think it's great. The IMCS, which is where I carry my ordination from, and this statement may get me in a little trouble, but it's not the first time. You guys have probably listened to enough of our episodes at this point to realize that I will say what I think and deal with whatever comes from that later. But the reality is that the IMCS, which is where Rabbi Eric and I carry our ordination, where Rabbi Toby and Rabbi Jonathan are working on their ordination, in my opinion, I do not think that the IMCS prioritizes education as much as it should. And I think that there are far better things we could be doing. And nonetheless, both organizations, I think, could be doing a lot more to raise funds or prioritize funds, as Rabbi Jonathan was saying, for the education of the future of our movement.
And I think what I'd like to see is, because I understand, a lot of these things have been built and established and have been, proven that with the people that come in, they graduate them from, they work.
Yeah.
I'd like to see them come together and join, because the thing about going to university or college today is not everything you hear you're going to agree with, especially when it's more the liberal arts stuff, like things in literature and philosophy and theology. You go to class and you hear that, and then you get to write in response to it. It doesn't mean you have to agree. I had a philosophy class.
And you learn pretty quick which professors are the ones that you can respond to, and which professors are the ones that you just give them the answer they want.
And I had a great philosophy professor who he would, as long as you could actually back up your argument, you would be fine on your papers, and as long as your grammar was fine too, which some of us struggle with. But I would write almost every paper I wrote was in direct opposition to what he would teach on, and he was fine with that. We had a great relationship through school. But coming together, having a physical location would be great, first off. But having a place where you have different rabbis and Messianic teachers from all different backgrounds, people who are, more halakhic, hold halakhic observance, to a higher degree than others, people who might be a little more on the Pentecostal side of things, but having them all there able to teach and present and bring students together.
Yeah. Everybody's got something to bring to the table.
Everybody's got something to bring to the table, and so having all that there would be super important, and that's what I would like to see. I would like to see, but again, back to unity, seeing people come together and bring these organizations together, and they can still remain their own separate things. Yeah. But I would like to see something that is jointly created. That's true. Provides a place of learning and growth for the future.
Yes.
Of the Messianic Jewish leaders.
Yeah. So with that said, we could probably go on and on for hours and hours on this. These issues, and look, in the future we'll probably have more episodes like this. It's one of the things about being a rabbi or in ministry or whatever is that we are thinkers, and a big part of congregational leadership is that we have to or should be always thinking about the future and how we can improve to make a lasting future and to leave behind a lasting legacy for the generations to come. So I'm sure we'll have more episodes where we cover issues like this. So thank you for listening with us. I do want to say real quick, we want to plug the Southeast Regional, the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America Southeast Regional Conference one more time in Orlando. Again, mjaa.org, December 16th through 18th at the Rosen Plaza Hotel. Please come and see us. And there's a very good chance, we're still discussing how to make it happen. There's a very good chance that we might actually record a Messiantics episode live at the conference, or at least at the hotel that the conference is in. So we'll see how that goes. Just throwing that out there. And then we also want to plug Brit Am's Messianic Men's Conference. And Jonathan, I'll let you.
Yeah, it's April 21st to the 23rd of 2023. And you can go to the Brit Am website and go over to the men's page, and there, the top of the men's page is a link that will lead you there, and you can register to come here. And we really look forward to having those of you who are going to sign up for that. But we will also have a table at the Southeast Conference this year. So if you're listening to this now and you're coming to the Southeast Conference, we will have the opportunity for you to sign up for the Messianic Men's Conference there at the Southeast.
Or you can go to Brit Am's website, Shalom Pensacola.
Yep, and sign up there.
.com and sign up there in advance and know that you got a slot available for you. There are also, I believe, hotel deals set up.
Yes, we have a hotel deal set up with one of the local hotels, and the room's a little discounted, and there's a shuttle to bring you here.
So if you go to the website, you'll find out all the information needed, and hopefully we'll see you at the men's conference as well. And who knows, maybe we'll, for kicks and giggles, we'll record an episode there too. So with that said, we'll talk to you guys later. Thank you for joining with us for the Messiantics podcast. Thank you for listening to the Messiantics podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at Messiantics Podcast.